Hello, this is Peter with PR Cinema Pioneers, and tonight I'm in the exact location of Richard Linklater's Before Sunrise, about 20 years later, in order to tell you that basically back then he had the exact right idea when making this film, in kind of like the method in how he came up with it, how he kind of had the building blocks there and rehearsed with the actors in order to kind of master time to a degree in the way that it was shot and edited, and basically how you can use the city as kind of like a tool, as well as the spaces in between the locations. Even though it's kind of subconscious, you get that effect just from watching the film. Even if you don't know Vienna, if you've never been here before, you know that there is a kind of discrepancy between the locations, and how they've kind of clearly progressed like on a character journey throughout the city that night. And yeah, there's a little bit of cheating going on, but also you're seeing a time manipulation in kind of temporal and spatial edits, in which the atmosphere that you're seeing is one after the other, kind of beautiful shot after beautiful shot, in order to make that the forefront of what's going on, make the kind of journey the forefront, not actually the locations or, any kind of gratuitous content. It would be so easy to go to every single location in Vienna, and, he did that to a degree, but he didn't actually do it gratuitously. He kind of progressed in a way that a couple would if they were on a first date in Vienna. And that's kind of what I'm delving into with the whole kind of concept of time. How you can manipulate it, in order to make more kind of consistent edits with kind of what you were going for in your original intention and idea, and how a little bit of that gets kind of lost in translation when it goes to production, and the reasons why that is, and the reasons why we love time so much in the films that tend to become our favourites. The rhythm of what we're seeing in terms of edit and shot duration, instead of if you were to plan things to be a certain duration every single time, it doesn't really work in a technical way. It's more like an emotional way, like a dance. It's important to remember that when constructing your edits, when constructing your shots for your shot list and your storyboard, and also instructing your actors and crew on when you turn up, what you're going to compromise and what you're not willing to compromise, how long you're going to keep the camera rolling, what kind of music you're going to play on set. All of this matters in terms of directing time, which is something you really should be doing if you want to be any good.
Come on, boy. Let's play.
Yeah, let's play. We're gonna have a lot of fun.
Time. One of the most fundamental things about cinema, one of the things which I evolved from pretty quickly to understanding the duration of a shot. So the duration of a shot is so important, whether it's, obviously 1 second, a few frames, or 5 minutes long, held on one shot, let's say. And every frame matters, so cutting it short at the beginning, despite what you might have planned, you can change it in the edit, and you should be changing it as you discover what the scene's about. You change it in the edit, you shorten down the frames at the front, frames at the end, perhaps, of your shot, and then, I'm basically telling you how to edit it. And having those shots together, of course, then creates a kind of rhythm when you have two shots. So it becomes like a musical score. You're putting the notes and chords next to each other to say a certain thing. By the end of it, you've got a phraseology. Let's say, if we're speaking in musical terms, in fact, it's a whole different art form, but it's a good metaphor. And, if you're saying atmosphere in one scene through time, and then in the next scene you're playing with time in a different way. This is okay as well. You don't have to be playing with time in the exact same way throughout your entire film, and it's kind of boring. There's no dynamics to your film then. So, and you also don't have to make it so that there's deliberately dynamics either. You're doing scene after scene of art and truth and character and, you know, showing atmosphere and cinematic language. These are more important than, let's say, having every shot in the scene has to be exactly 20 frames long, or exactly 2 seconds long. That is, how much is that? That's like 48 frames. So then, if you do a scene that has all these shots which are the same length of time, it just becomes this stale kind of nightmare where you're not thinking about where to cut in a shot. Where do you cut on the emotion? Where do you kind of, you know, you can't plan for that when you're shooting it. So why are you doing it in the edit, trying to make some kind of rhythm out of that? It's not going to work. I've always admired slow cinema. Whether it was, and I always pictured this Breaking Bad versus Once Upon a Time in the West mentality of, if you can make Breaking Bad and be inspired by Sergio Leone's westerns, or you can make a Tarantino film inspired by Sergio Leone's westerns, then, you know, we're talking about a genre which is ingrained in kind of an old way of making films, which means that the old ways can be evolved into the new ways. They can be transplanted. Although nowadays the way that I make films is not to kind of copy anyone else's in a kind of Andrei Tarkovsky way. So, and the way that he plays with time is just incredible in kind of setting you into a trance. So time has this unique ability, like in life, to play with your perception of it. And if you can control that in the edit, if you can somehow plan that from the very offset to be the point of a scene, then you've already got a kind of one-up on the audience subconsciously. And you're already playing with them in a trance way, in a way that they're going to appreciate the film for its artistic merit. You're, as Tarkovsky would say, sculpting with time. Read that book. It will tell you more than what I have to tell you about it. I really feel like slow cinema is such a great default position to come from, because it really allows you to learn so much about a scene that you're about to shoot and edit. It teaches you so much about blocking, about maybe the old ways of filmmaking, you know, this new trend of having things cut so very quickly, and our attention span getting shorter and shorter. You're probably bored of listening to me speak, but really, I should be able to go on for about half an hour, and you should be listening to every word that I'm saying and never getting bored once, and never switching off, never looking at your phone once, or, you know, drifting off, clicking about. But what we're talking about here is attention span and perspective and perception in cinema. If you see a scene from a certain character perspective, we're showing you inside how that character thinks, how that character approaches something. Is it methodically? Is it kind of they approach it like a crazed lunatic, sociopath or psychopath, going into a situation and how they experience the world? Is that Mr. Robot, paranoid schizophrenia idea, you know, that Fight Club mentality? Or is it something which you would take if you were Mike Ehrmantraut in Better Call Saul? That, again, we're playing with slow cinema there, but in a different way, as I say, methodically. This is why time is so interesting, because you can have a 3-hour film like The Wolf of Wall Street, don't quote me on that, but you can have a 3-hour film and it can be told so quickly that you feel like that time has passed so quickly. Everything just moves so fast. From the blocking to the kind of shaped cinematic language, the moves of the cameras, the cuts, how quickly we're cutting from a scene, how quickly the scenes actually end, or actually how long the scenes are, but how quickly we cut sometimes. And it's not to say that this is done not thinking about the third image in between the shots. That is very well thought out, and sometimes we're cutting between something simple to understand so that we're understanding a certain information release about character. So, you see, a lot goes into it, but, you know, it's important. You don't always have to think about all these things, I find, although the more experience you have, the more you'll get used to just naturally just getting these things correct. And they become a part of your understanding of cinema. We're understanding cinema by watching and making films and editing. So, you know, you're going to become a scriptwriter of time. You're going to become a storyboard artist, storyboarding time, shooting time, where your actors rehearsing time, where your actors editing time in the end. So you better get used to this, that if you've become a master at each point in the process of time, that is just one way in which you're infecting the audience. The more information that you put into a scene, whether it's composition-wise, whether it's dialogue, score, sound, that kind of thing, motion in the frame, the more you're speeding up or slowing down a scene. If you have this scene, which is just of a lamppost that I got over YouTube, is this really cinematic if I stop talking for a second? Or is it the most boring scene of all time? This could be an example of slow cinema at its finest. Or it could be that boring. And it probably is boring because this is probably too far on the experimental side of things. And it's important to watch a few experimental films to see just how far you can take this. Some people live in that experimental area. Some people want to go a lot more commercial. Some people like to live in the in-between and pluck from both worlds. That's kind of where I am. The more you can experiment, though, with every single film in a certain way, whether it's playing with time, playing with poetry, cinematic language, learn about more to do with cinema all the time so that you're, you know, I mean, Scorsese will make a documentary, then make a feature, you know, like Casino or Goodfellas, Color of Money, then he'll make a documentary, then he'll go back to a dramatic fictional film. And he will employ the same techniques from those non-fiction pieces into his fictional films to help him build. He spoke about Rolling Thunder Review to be an inspiration for how he structured The Irishman. And if you think about that, how can a documentary on Bob Dylan inspire the structure for a totally different character, a totally different person? Because it was more like a road trip. It was that feeling, that structure came from that. And it probably had something to do with the timing, the rhythm. You know, De Niro talks about rhythm quite a lot, how important it is to get that right. Because if you get that right, you've kind of nailed the scene in a way. But have you ever seen someone try and act slowly or act quickly? It is not something that you can actually act, I think, you know, because it isn't coming from a place of good intention in how you're depicting someone. I mean, in life, you don't go about trying to be quicker or trying to be slower. You're just who you are that day, or who you are because maybe you've slowed down that day, or you've had too much sugar, for example, or cocaine, maybe, and, you know, or weed, and you're just kind of either chilled out or you're running at 100 miles an hour. But the kind of scene in real life will change because of that. You know, if you're chilled out, other people tend to kind of be chilled out in reaction to you. So, you know, it all kind of helps build what emotion you're coming at in real life, let alone on screen. And all you're trying to do is get your actors to do that. And that's the important part of production, is organising that environment so that your actors are actually going at the pace that you want. You can get them to listen to music, in which case it will speed them up or slow them down. So it really is the beats per minute and what rate you're actually showing everything else in the frame. If you're showing a lot going on in the frame and, a very chilled out, relaxing score, the two kind of either balance each other out or don't, depending on each individual case that we're looking at. Or, if you do the opposite, where there's a lot going on in the sound, a very quick sound, but, the shot is, the lamppost shot, static, then it will show something else, and it will be maybe very quick, or, it tends to work whichever one is strongest. Whichever is doing the most to kind of speed it up. It tends to be that if you speed something up, it's hard to slow it down, I think. Whereas the opposite is probably a lot easier. I feel like the best way to get the right timing, the right rhythm, the right beats per minute in a scene is usually because of the philosophy that comes behind the intention for making the film. So if you're coming at it from a kind of, I'm doing a film on today's generation, well, you're going to know maybe from your research what kind of pace that generation moves at, and you're going to maybe influence your actors and influence the scenes to work at that kind of pace. If you're talking about workers in a company, maybe warehouse workers, you're gonna work at that kind of pace and influence your actors that way. So it really is, like with the Wolf of Wall Street, everything's going 100 miles an hour, and it's for a reason. They weren't necessarily planning to go at that particular speed. It's just things ended up at that speed, perhaps because of the research that they've done, because of the way that the first few scenes went in terms of rhythm. They just constantly sped up, and sped up. Think about how many different speeds there are for a scene at night time. If you take a film like Naked, it runs at a different pace of a film like After Hours, definitely at a different pace for a film like Chungking Express, which was inspired from that kind of MTV style that was prevalent in, 1994 when the film was made. So you've really been inspired by the time that it was set in and the attention span from the time it was set in. But sometimes, you can make a film nowadays like Silence and have it so slow paced, or, Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, have it so slow paced, Hateful Eight kind of idea. And these films can work. And especially playing about with so slow cinema is so super effective. Having a shot linger on so you kind of get that second hit of what we're actually seeing, rather than rushing through a scene, cutting from shot to shot to shot. One of the actual problems, if there is a problem with The Wolf of Wall Street, it's that you rarely get that kind of lingering second shot, second hit from, that you would have gotten with a film like Colour and Money or Taxi Driver, or, a film like Fargo, for example. It's harder to get that from The Wolf of Wall Street because it has to be fast, because it has to show character that way. Although you do get it, for example, in the Lamborghini sequence, or even when it slows down to, explain what a quaalude is. We're seeing these moments for a reason. They're kind of like a break in the action, but it is playing with time. It is always playing with time in certain ways, whether we're moving in slow motion and we're actually hearing the audio in real time. It is essential to balance things out so that we're not being too disruptive, so that we're telling the story at the same time. We're not just indulging in cool shots, cool, cinematic language for the sake of it. A great way to understand this further than what I can say is to pick your favourite director, whether that be Paul Thomas Anderson, Wes Anderson, Wong Kar-wai, Richard Linklater, Martin Scorsese, Andrei Tarkovsky, and take their entire filmography, watch all of their films if you haven't, you probably have, but then analyze how different each film is coming at a point about time. So the way that they've actually structured their films due to time, how their shots might be longer sometimes, and it's because of the character a lot of the time, because that's how they see the world, or it's because of the rhythm for atmosphere's sake, for the type of film that you're telling, and what was important to them. And you'll see that there is a difference even in their own filmography. It's not just the speed that they like to go at, but it's also quite often it is still quite slow, because they know about slow cinema. They know about that second hit that they're going to get out of a shot, and the importance of silence.